these kinds of contexts. What I like to talk about is what I see as the repertoires of resistance. And the important point here is to correlate any idea of resistance to the forms of autocracy that we're talking about. And this is significant and important both strategically and morally, right? If we think about the forms of authoritarianism, we've heard a whole range here, from coup d'etats that lead to military dictatorships, right across to autocratic legalism, where there's an attempt to use the law or to subvert the law to achieve certain goals. And I think what's interesting is in the political science, they talk about consolidated democracies, which I think we now understand there's no such thing as democracy that lasts forever. And in the same way, I think we can think about consolidated autocracies or authoritarianism as also things that don't necessarily and never last forever. And so it's really a contested space right across. And when we think about that, and it goes all the way from the extents of the use of violence to, on the one hand, to the use of public empowerment on the other. So if you think about it in terms of democratizing regimes versus autocratizing regimes, the issue is really what space is there that's still open for legal contestation against efforts to close democratic space or to undermine institutions. In this, I use the example of South Africa, where we've seen an attempt by a president in the name of Zuma to capture the state, to use these various mechanisms to actually capture all state institutions, to undermine those institutions. You take the case of the public protector, which was the institution which first pointed out the level of corruption that got him into trouble, that put him on the back foot, and then in the process, how he then proceeded to undermine that institution to the point where the present public protector is about to be hopefully thrown out of office. If you think about repertoires of resistance in this context, people often think about the range of resistance from armed struggle all the way through lawfare, underground organization to mass political participation. And I think it's really important when we think about these things to understand that link between the kinds of authoritarianism we're thinking about and the availability of different kinds and forms of resistance, and to be very vigilant against adventurism one way or another. To either assume that, of course, we can just carry on, we can be critical, and we don't understand that there's a security state that's actually monitoring and taking action. Or on the other hand, thinking that, we can just pick up whatever tools to try and fight back without realizing there's consequences to those tools as well, particularly when you're thinking about violence in that context. And finally, I'm reminded that we need to think back to the work of Ernst Frankl in the 1930s in Germany, and the idea of the dual state, the normative and the prerogative law, and the contestation over law today. And in many ways, it's that contestation over, is law normative and are we giving values to it, versus the prerogative law that is taking control, that's using power first. This attempt to reframe democracy as minority control, right? To break up and to individualize everything so that you can control, right? The difference of control versus public participation versus collective activity, which is what they are so afraid of and so opposed to. And I think I could give the one example in terms of what Bruce was talking about in the United States today. If you think of the attempts to control the electoral form through the gerrymandering and state control, and then the counter movement by, for instance, in Wisconsin today, where there's an election for a Supreme Court justice that switches the balance on the Supreme Court. And the first cases that have been brought are both to address the question of abortion, to reverse the anti-abortion work, and also to now attack gerrymandering, to actually require a democratic form in the state, where 54, 56% vote Democratic, and the Republicans end up with 64% of the legislature. That where even normal democratic form doesn't actually produce results that reflect that. But at the same time, having to pick those moments where you might be able to use the legal mechanisms to actually reverse, to actually resist. but they can also be very restricted. But I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Heinz. That was really wonderful and a very useful perspective. So then we'll hear from Alida.
Well, first of all, thanks for a great panel who was able to summarize the recent happenings on the autocratization front in just over an hour. I think throughout your presentations, you were able to show that autocratization, resistance, and democratic fragility both have a common thread throughout these regions and throughout recent times, as well as diverging trends. We were shown how different actors use laws and courts, or use force, or use mass mobilization, or economic strategies to restrict political contestation, participation, rights, and accountability. Combining these perspectives, it's clear that autocratization is a global concern and it's a universal problem. And I think, especially with Bruce's last comment, it's also clear that what's happening in one country or one region may influence and escalate what's happening in other parts of the world. In all regions, we saw the erosion of democratic norms, manipulation of laws and institutions, concentrations of power as a recurring theme. There are global factors at play here, for example, the rise of populism or the impact of digital technologies, shifts in international power dynamics. There was a lot said already, so as part of my contribution to kickstarting the discussion, I would like to mention that we also see temporality. We were also shown U-turns. We also see what's happening in Ukraine currently and how it's able to resist this outside force of autocratization efforts. So my questions for the panel, and you are free to pick if you wish to answer to some of those. How can international cooperation better support democratic resilience? How can nations learn from successful resilience stories from across regions? And how can we foster a shared global commitment to democracy? And again, thank you so much for your brilliant contributions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, both Heinz and Alida, for your contributions. We'll then open up the floor to all of you. So even if you need to note down questions, because I want to take a few more before giving the word back, because then I'm not sure how much time we'll have for more questions. So I'm going to do that. We have almost half an hour for the discussion, which is not so bad. And what we do is that we got everyone, there is a microphone there, you queue on this side, and then you each get. It's about, you know, these shows where it's about getting first to the microphone. However you can do it, and that's how it is. Very good. So you made it first. You were first. Yes. No, Julia. No, you were first. So please. It doesn't matter.
Bit high.
So then you take the other one.
Yeah, this works? Okay. So this is a question for Maria. It's kind of a question based on what Francisca was saying about the different pillars of, what we consider democracy. And I was wondering, about Ukraine, and we've seen, as you said, this resilience to Putin's invasion and how that has fostered a greater pro-democracy sentiment. But I was wondering, my knowledge of the Eastern European context is superficial at best, so I apologize in advance if this is just an obvious question, but I do know that it's a region which has been marked by ethnic conflicts in the past, and that Zelensky, before he became the leader of the anti-war resistance, he has played with populism and nationalism, and we've seen some questions about Ukraine, you know, related to the, for instance, the Azov militia and all of this. So I was just wondering, when we consider, you know, the whole discussion, what we can do to prevent new autocratic democracies, what is, when we speak of a greater commitment on the part of the Ukrainian population to democracy, what conception of democracy are we talking about? Is it, you mentioned entrenchment of competitive politics, which is great, but I was wondering if it also encompasses the other principles that Francisca talked about, for instance, you know, related to non-arbitrariness and social justice. I think that also was mentioned in the keynote about India. So just maybe if you could get into that a little bit, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And before you give the microphone away, everybody should say their name and where they're from.
Yeah, okay. So I'm Julia. I'm from Brazil, and I'm really sorry for the whole confusion with the microphones and for not saying my name before, but I was the first to make a question in the whole exchange. So.
But pronouncing your name after is perfectly fine.
Okay.
So thank you so much.
Thank you, Siri.
Okay, so my name is Sarah Abbas. I'm coming today from Berlin, but I'm from Sudan in the US. I'm a fellow at the Open Society Foundations. My question is also for Professor Popova, although it might be relevant to others on the panel. It was really interesting to see your presentation, and I wondered if you could also comment about this move towards authoritarianism through also democratic processes in other parts of Europe, because I sometimes fear that the situation with Ukraine is overshadowing what is happening actually across the continent. And it's as if this is the only issue that is in terms of this question we're talking about today. And I'm also interested to know about even countries that aren't, for example, like where Spain is or elsewhere, the sort of export of authoritarianism to the other regions, for example, through the externalized borders. So the situation in my country today is partly related to the externalization of the European border, which has led to the rise of this militia that is now wreaking havoc in the country, right? Because they are also border guards for Europe in Sudan. So I just wondered if you or anyone else on the panel could also comment on this. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Jackie Dugard. I'm from the university currently known as Columbia in the US, but also from WITS in Johannesburg. I'd like to ask a question, sort of overarching question. I was struck particularly by two comments from Namita, but I think I'd like to get some responses from anyone if there is resonance. And that is what you think the role of patriarchy is in all of these autocratic tendencies. And secondly, the role of hypocrisy in the hegemonic legal order. And particularly, I would return to Namita's point about Palestine and this hypocrisy in the rules-based order. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you. I'm Tinashe. I'm from Zimbabwe, studying in Wisconsin. Thank you so much for your great presentations. All protocols observed. My question is, Professor Barr, are there specific lessons you think you can present to the rest of the continent to avoid the pattern in West Africa? Given what happened in Zimbabwe in 2017, what can the rest of Southern Africa do so that it doesn't devolve into what has been happening in West Africa? And to Bruce, I was wondering, what is your take on Aziz Rana's claim that the US Constitution is foundationally minoritarian, and so those who have been mobilizing legal resources against democracy actually speak to a certain original suspicion against democracy towards elitism? Thank you.
Yeah, Björn Björksvik, head of the Green Party International Committee here in Westland. The situation is bad and getting worse, as you say. And as far as I understand, also Vidam's research is that politicians who have been elected many times dismantle the system from the inside, from the top, so to say. And that we weren't quite prepared for this after the end of the Cold War, and we thought everything would go okay and so on. So my topic now is what to do. and resistance, the ways that have been mentioned here, we are, as a part of the Green movement, a small party, but still, we are forming now a global network of parties. And that's my idea and what I would like to hear your opinions about. Because, like Vidam talks about, that the liberal democracies and the forces here need to join to protect what we have and strengthen, of course. So that the academia, the political parties who share the same values, civil society, and the media, not the corporate media necessarily, who have these common interests, we should somehow develop our cooperation and do something without mixing too much, but to join forces. I would like to hear your opinion about that. Last thing is this panel, which Vidam proposes, experts like the panel on climate change. What is your opinion? Is that a good idea, or would it be just become another expert panel?
Thank you, Bjarte.
Hi, my name is Alicia Yeaman, and I'm from Harvard University. I've had the privilege of participating in a lot of these Bergen Exchanges, which is great. My question, and I'm glad I came after the Green Party representative, is I didn't hear a lot about how you tie these phenomena to growing climate crisis and the related forces on migration and xenophobia. And I guess also how ballooning social inequality, and in many countries, say in Latin America, ballooning debt crises and austerity are playing out in anti-democratic and fueling anti-democratic trends, and certainly being used, distracting people with anti-gender ideology, etc. Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia. You can just pause it.
Hi, my name is Yumba. I'm from the University of Pretoria, South Africa. And my question is for Maria. What is your opinion of countries from the global south being put under pressure, particularly from the US, to take a stand when it comes to the Ukraine-Russia conflict, but who are fearful of the implications of seeming to pick a side because of their vulnerable position in the global economic space?
Thank you so much, all of you, for really, really good questions. And you now have a wealth of things to reflect on and respond to. And I think we may, if you're brief, relatively, we can also have another round, so you can, so if anybody else wants to follow up on something that was said already or your responses, please. So I think we'll go this time in the order of that you spoke, actually, since it's a long time since we heard from the first ones. Oumar.
Thank you all for these brilliant questions. I'll just make two brief comments, and one tied to the externalization of EU borders and policies, for instance, and what that can tell us about even the current events regarding coups in the Sahel. As you know, these coups are also quite popular among the urban youth. So there's a lot of young men out there in the cities of these countries who actually support the military for taking over power. And in some sense, that is also related to backlash against the EU policies, especially when it comes to the immigration policies. We tend to talk a lot about anti-French sentiment in the Sahel, but I would say it goes beyond just anti-French sentiment. It is actually an anti-EU stance, because these urban youth are living the consequences of very oppressive EU policies, Also because we live in a planet where the majority of the people on this planet are condemned to be born to die in a very small parcel of territory and who have no way of getting the freedom to move around on this planet. And that does also have some negative consequences on how people perceive these policies, and therefore the support or for more military involvement in the politics, because they view the failure of the incumbent governments to deal accordingly and to respond to the demands of their population in the face of the EU oppressive policies. So that's one thing, and that also is tied to the question on hypocrisy and patriarchy. Yes, patriarchy, of course, because these coups are led by usually some young military officers, so there's a connection there. The hypocrisy too, I'm engaged right now in a study that looks at the mid-20th century, especially in 1948, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and how that is a cornerstone of what came to be the liberal international order. And one of my arguments is actually that the liberal international order is built upon violence, colonial violence at the time, and continued violence and imperialism, which has remained the albatross at the core of what constitutes liberalism. But that's a discussion for another day. To Tinashe's question on Zimbabwe, the coup in Zimbabwe, and what can we learn from it? Not all coups are the same, of course. As you know, the coup in Zimbabwe was not called as such by most Western states because they were quite happy that Mugabe get to be removed from power. More recently in Chad, we had the same situation. So Déby dies, gets replaced by his son. A couple of weeks ago, Macron goes there, and there's no sanctions against Chad. Everybody's cheering this coup, or that he's replaced by his son. And then people, look at that and they know that the EU and European countries and the United States and Western powers in general have, depending on where their interests lay, different views of democratic backsliding and military coups. But I'll just stay there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So then you can continue, Maria.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for these wonderful questions. I will start, I'll try to cover most of them. So I'll start with the question about what kind of competitive regime Ukraine is. And in fact, Zelensky came to power not as a nationalist, but defeated a nationalist in the 2019 election, and came as a Russian speaker wanting to actually fix things with Russia, promising to talk to Putin and fix things. It didn't work out. As soon as he came to power, Russia signaled and thought of him as a clown and wanted to humiliate him immediately. So he was very quickly discouraged by this possibility. But on the question of the narrative about a strong far right in Ukraine that's promoting an exclusive identity, I would actually recommend a recent book by Olga Onuch from Manchester and Henry Hale from George Washington University that talks about specifically how the Zelensky, they call it the title is the Zelensky effect, and say that he is in fact not the cause of anything, but the effect, the product of Ukraine's civic identity, very much a non-ethnic, inclusive identity that has developed over the last 20 years. And the role of the far right is vastly exaggerated. To give you just one small example, not only are they not represented in parliament because they cannot pass the threshold, but in local elections, out of 18,000 local council seats contested, in the last election, the far-right Azov associated party won 18 out of 18,000. So they're really not a political force to be reckoned with. Now, on patriarchy and autocratic tendencies, I mean, I can't miss the opportunity to emphasize that, of course, Putin is very much driven by a macho conception, not only of himself, but also sort of a patriarchal way of running foreign policy. And to give you an example, in the run-up to the war, to the full-scale invasion in February, he made an actually official announcement using a rape analogy. And when he said that Ukraine has to submit to a list of demands, he used a Russian saying, like it or not, you will have to bear it, my beauty. A very, very obvious rape analogy there. So there's a lot of it built into the way he interprets the world. On the connection to the climate crisis, I also want to recommend a book, a great new book by a Russian political scientist, Alexander Etkind, called Russia Against Modernity, which actually ties the idea that Russia is waging this war partly because it is worried about its oil, its energy, its ability to dominate and to use its energy trump card as a way to exert influence on the world stage. And on the global South being pressured to pick a position when they're in a vulnerable state, point well taken, that there is a lot of diplomatic pressure. But I want to emphasize here, coming from the West, point well taken. But I want to emphasize here that Russia is doing more than diplomatic pressure against the global South here. The sabotage of the grain deal and the Russia's invasion and the fact that it has undermined Ukraine's ability to supply the world with grain is actually a concerted effort by Russia to blackmail the South, the global South, and this way manage to win this war. And here I will give an example of from a woman called Margarita Simonian, who is a pundit, well-known pundit in Russia, the chief of the Russia Today network. And she explicitly said in an interview, our best bet now to win this war is to cause a global famine. And then everybody's going to turn against, abandon Ukraine, and we're going to win. They're going to let us win. So this is the tool this is the kind of pressure that Russia seeks to exert on the global South, and that's an important one too.
Thank you so much. A lot in a short time. Francisca.
Oh, I have a mess of notes now. Everything was. I find very inspiring some of the concepts that Heinz used, no? This idea of there's no such thing as consolidated autocracies. Because, in the end, I can't but, be optimistic that this is kind of a last demonstration of whatever, patriarchy and this package of things, but that, there's a lot in terms of spaces and repertoires of resistance. This is not the other thing. So as Alida asked us about what we can learn from resistance in other countries, and I think one of the strategies of the neo-autocrats, because they are legalist, most of them, has been comparative law. And this is really a call for us to be comparatives of resistance. So maybe, in the next Bergen Exchange, some of the panels could be just focused not on diagnosis. I mean, we are mixing diagnosis with resistance this time, but only in studying, repertoires of resistance and promoting the comparative law, or the comparative study more in general of strategies of resistance, learning from resistance all over the world. Because, I mean, it's amazing that even if everything is so dire, I mean, even in Israel, the amount of demonstrations, in the streets because of this, judicial reform or the strikes that we see all around. Yeah, there's some sense that it can be like, 50 more years of this same kind of autocratic, of consolidation of this. I don't know. What else I wanted to well, the hypocrisy thing. Yes, I think one of the things is that most of the things that legal autocrats do are little sins that, apparently consolidated democracies have done. So yes, this puts a standard of abandoning these spaces of hypocrisy that all, North Atlantic democracies have always coexisted with. And about the climate crisis, I agree. We should. I mean, I think we will be learning about this in this seminar. But we should really make an effort to mainstream the climate and environmental thing into our discussions. It's not easy because it's too new, but in particular, I also want to be like optimistic in the following sense. I think the climate crisis and the climate change will be so fast that, for instance, in the migration, I don't see Alicia, I don't want, I'm here. I think this will be so fast that now we imagine the climate migration crisis in the terms we have always been imagining the disadvantaged people migration, but we can see a very quick change of that in the sense that maybe we will have like, rich people, and in rich countries, I mean, like having such a big impact that this may like promote a progressive change in migration. But I don't know, this is like futuristic, but I think the effects will be huge, and we are not really coming up with the responsibility of mainstreaming this.
Thank you, Siska. I think we need to do the last 4-minute split between Namita and Bruce. So please, Namita.
Thank you for those wonderful comments and questions from everyone. Heinz, yeah, I think that your idea of consolidated democracies, consolidated autocracies is really a helpful way of thinking about this. There is constant contestation, that is going on in India. We've had the National Register for Citizens and the Citizenship Amendment Act had to be rolled back because of protests on the ground. Of course, there is constant, attacks on the protests as well. So basically, the use of the criminal law, like the criminal procedure law, section 144, which allows the police to prevent assembly. So for law and order reasons, was used to dismantle protests. The COVID crisis actually resulted, but the laws were rolled back. Similarly, laws that were going to make changes to the agricultural sector, on which 60% of Indians depend upon their livelihoods. After a year of protests, the longest protest movement in human history, the laws were rolled back. So there are instances of successful resistance. There's also resistance and contestation in the courts. Rahul Gandhi, who is the scion of the Gandhi family, whose grandmother was the earlier authoritarian, but who now is being persecuted by the authoritarian regime, was sentenced for 2 years in prison for criminal defamation. So there are laws that so freedom of association, section 144 is being used for speech, criminal defamation, sedition. These are the laws. Everything is being delegitimized as anti-national, and to that extent, but the courts recently, the Supreme Court gave him a reprieve, and he's back in Parliament after having been disqualified for basically saying for criminal defamation, basically, and after 134 days, he's back. He also led this protest movement, the Bharat Jodo Yatra, which basically in the form of the Gandhian agitation movements to try and unify the country along a message of love, peace, and harmony, as opposed to resistance. The last 2 points quickly that I'll make is one is that the use of technology for surveillance of citizens is something that is being used extendedly, and it is being used alongside laws to try and disenfranchise. But technology is also the way through which the civil war in Manipur, we have a civil war going on, came onto the national stage. And to the last point on international cooperation.
Because the last minute needs to be processed.
Okay, last thing then. So I'm not going to answer the question about the Constitution in the United States because we have three very big named law professors from the US in the audience. So I'll leave that for that one and I'll punt. I have to point out though, I mean, I'm not as sanguine about the resistance as many people here are. I think that many of the changes that have taken place have ratcheted and it's locked. And it's going to be very, very difficult to ratchet it back down to where it becomes more democratic. I think the fact that the average age of the justices of the US Supreme Court is so young and the life appointments, it's going to be really, really difficult to reverse that no matter what happens in the next election, even if they take a landslide in the Senate and take a landslide in everything. It will be very, very hard to undo those things.
Thank you, Bruce. Very good last words, which remind me which allows me to, in the 25 seconds left of this session, to thank each and every one of you. This was amazing. We also realize how difficult time is, even in the longest session in the history of the Bergen Exchanges. So enjoy the break. Come back in 15 minutes. There is coffee, there is snacks, there are good people to talk to, there are posters from the PhD students. See you in 15 minutes.